Okay, I'm still catching up on some of the news, but I am almost there, and I think I'll do an update on what's going on with presidential polling, as well as some of the different issues that are going on in the Democratic race. So, if you're not aware, I pretty much would say that most of the candidates who are in the race don't really matter. They're not going to win anyway. And to be honest with you, even the ones that are in the race probably wouldn't make a good president. But let's look at it from the standpoint of someone who is determined to vote in the Democratic primary and then vote for the Democrats in a general election. The person that I see who is starting to emerge as the strongest candidate, the one with the most staying power, is Elizabeth Warren. And then, despite the fact that today he has been, I guess, put into surgery and he's canceling all of his events, is Bernie Sanders. And even with that, I would say Bernie Sanders is still the second strongest candidate. And then you could still say perhaps that Joe Biden is the third candidate, even though if you look at all three of the latest polls, you have in New Hampshire, Elizabeth Warren is now leading him, apparently. Now, some of these polls I think are bullcrap, but the fact is that if you really think about it, it could be that Warren's lead is even larger than 1% than over Biden. I have a hard time believing that you have Joe Biden voters out there that are eager to go and cast their votes for a guy who is forgetting basic events and things that have happened in his life. He said things like that he was vice president during the Parkland shooting. He said things about how I guess poor kids can be just as bright as white kids, things like that. So no, Joe Biden, I think, is right now, I guess, the pace car, and he will eventually just be driven off the track, either willingly or unwillingly, and it's going to happen. Now, if you're looking at the market this week, it's actually good news, I guess, for the Democrats, if you want to think about it that way. It's not going very well. I can look over and see that the Dow is down over 500 points, and that's not good. And I think really, if you're one of these people who is a diehard Republican, you have to take into account that the mood of the country is, I think, possibly going to drag it into a recession. It doesn't make it better for the country if a Democrat gets into power, because I think that their policies overall will lead to much worse economic ruin, especially now. With Obama, you could make the argument that he was something of a pragmatic Democrat. He was someone who, he might have been, I guess, scummy in many of his own policies, but at the end of the day, his personal self-interest prevailed. He wanted to get reelected, and he did extend some of these tax cuts, and he didn't go completely buck wild with spending, although he did do pretty bad. But really what we're talking about right now is this problem with the rest of the Democrats. You have Warren Sanders and also Andrew Yang, and most of the other candidates are pretty crazy about spending. Kamala Harris, I would say, is too disingenuous to know what she really wants to do. And Joe Biden, I think, would just return to more of the same Obama Keynesian economics. So there is no good Democratic alternative to Donald Trump. That's really the problem, that if you're someone who is really worried about the economics right now, about the way that the country is going, and I'm not saying that Trump is doing a terrible job, but if we do go into a recession, I mean, it is a topic that's a legitimate gripe. You don't want it's actually dipping now almost to 26,000. Okay, so it could come back, obviously, and we've had days. I remember last December, I believe it was last December, we had it says India opens defecation-free areas. Good for them. There was a 2 day period, I think, in December where the Dow plunged 1,000 points and then it rose 1,000 points, and we never know what's going to happen. But you do have to really factor in the economy as being the real key here. The economy has to be the focus for the Trump administration in order to shore up the base that he has. Obviously, there's all of this building the wall that's going on. They are building miles and miles of wall now, which is certainly going to validate a lot of his promises to his base. And then possibly signing a new trade. They did sign the new trade deal with Mexico and Canada, but ratifying it with Congress, that has to be a priority. He has to push it through in this impeachment vote. It could be either an obstacle or it could force Congress to put it through. Now we're going to go through really quick all the different candidacies and really where I think that they are. So first of all, let's look at. We'll go from the bottom to the top. Now, De Blasio dropped out in September, and I don't even remember if I made a video about that. But Bill De Blasio is, I guess, the template for one of the, generally like these politicians who believe, well, I'm a big fish in a small pond. Think about that. He, as mayor of New York, he sees himself as a big fish in a small pond. And then he goes onto the national stage and he flops completely. Nobody even wants to pay attention to him. He is just insufferable, and he does well on the debate stage just because he's more obnoxious. Doing well on the debate stage, people should be aware, is not an indication that you're going to become president, right? There have been, over the years, there have been several candidates who did very well on the debate stage, and they ended up getting schlonged at the vote. Sometimes not. So, for example, Bernie Sanders, you could say it wasn't entirely his fault that he didn't do well at the polls, but I still think he would have lost to Hillary Clinton. Ron Paul did very well in the 2008 debates. I do believe that there was some foul play preventing him from getting higher, but the truth is that you could do very well in the debate, and then at the end of the day, you still fall short because simply you don't have the resources and you don't have the real name recognition to make it. So there's all these other people who I think should have withdrawn by now. Joe Sestak, who I have no idea why he joined the race. Nobody knows who he is. He's a former congressman from Pennsylvania. Tim Ryan here from Ohio, also a clown, absolutely no reason to still be in it. And he should be going back to Congress and doing whatever job they have left to do there, because they're not going to go anywhere with a guy like Tim Ryan who's pretending to be Mr. Unions and blue-collar jobs and showering after work guy. That's his whole shtick is, I represent people who shower after work. Well, Tim, I mean, I shower after working too, and that has nothing to do with who I vote for. Wayne Messam, nobody knows who he is. John Delaney, I think of the moderate candidates, was the most competent, and he's going nowhere, so he should be out. Steve Bullock, same thing. Michael Bennet also. So you even have senators and governors who are running in the race, and probably 99.9% of Americans would probably be unable to either name them or pick them out of a lineup. Then you have Marianne Williamson. She should be on the debate stage. That's not going to happen. She is going to probably be, I guess, forced out of the race because of the DNC just ignoring her. So there's only one qualifying poll with her making it at the debate stage. But that's the thing. If you look at these polls, in many cases, they don't even have these candidates' names on them, because at a certain point, you start to ask, why even include these names? So no, Marianne Williamson is, I believe, she's toast, unfortunately for her. And you also have Tulsi Gabbard. Glad to see she's back in the debate stage. It's not going to help her win. The party has completely bought into the impeachment fever, just like they bought into Russiagate. And all those things are issues that Tulsi Gabbard goes against the grain with the party, and it's not going to help her. She's going to be basically pushed out. So we're going to talk a little bit about, in the time we have left, we don't have much time, about the effect of Bernie Sanders' possible suspension of the campaign, how that will affect his supporters. and I think it could go a couple ways. Some other people that shouldn't even be in the race: Julian Castro, Amy Klobuchar, Cory Booker, and I think those three, they are essentially treading water. They have virtually no support. The fact that they even appear in the polls, I think, is pretty funny. I've never met a single person who would vote for either of those three. Of them, I would say, they each have their moments. I think Amy Klobuchar was I guess the least hysterical over the past few months, but they're all really crappy candidates. And I would say that of the three, Cory Booker is the worst. He seems to be just desperate to get his career off the ground. And this presidential campaign is going to damage his further ambitions going forward. Now, if you're looking to stay in the Senate, which he could just run again in 2020, which he probably will end up doing, I don't think it's necessarily a problem. You can keep running for Senate forever, and you basically there's no failure over there. You're basically unaccountable so long as you can keep people happy and grease the palms of other politicians, especially in New Jersey. So for Cory Booker, there's not much to lose. Amy Klobuchar, it's the same issue with Julian Castro. Where does he go from here? There's nowhere to go, and his career will be virtually over. You could say that Beto O'Rourke, I think, is slightly above the other three, and he's not going to be going very far either. Andrew Yang's running a little bit of a different campaign, so we'll see what happens with him. I think that the enthusiasm for Yang is certainly more genuine than for the other candidates, whereas you have Tom Steyer, who essentially astroturfed himself into the debate, and having Tom Steyer on the stage is not going to be a help for the Democrats. He's a raving lunatic. So yeah, that's going to be definitely a problem for the Democrats having Tom Steyer in the mix at all. Who else? You have Kamala Harris. She is on the trend downward, and she's going to keep going down, just like she has her entire career, been going down on a lot of dudes, and now she's going down on the polls. And then you have Warren, Sanders, Buttigieg, and Biden. So Buttigieg, I think is not doing the stupid thing by dropping out. I think he should definitely stick around at least a little bit. Maybe he can pick up some of the voters that could fall off the Biden train. He could even pick up some of the voters should there be a long-term problem with Sanders that were on the Sanders campaign. I'm not sure. I don't think that there's a good transfer of loyalties that's really going to be very smooth if Bernie Sanders ends up not being able to continue to campaign, which is a big if. He has suspended events for the foreseeable future, but it's not as if the campaign is already in the midst of the primaries. He could still recover and go back to work by the end of the year, and I don't think that it would really be a problem. So really, you have certain campaigns that I would say the fan bases are enemies of each other. So that would be Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg. That would be Warren and Sanders. Their supporters hate each other. I don't think Warren and Sanders really have a problem with each other. And then you have Beto and Bernie Sanders. So it's Beto, Buttigieg. All of them have like real problems with the Sanders campaign. Even Andrew Yang, I would say, his campaign fights, especially with the Sanders campaign. You're going to see essentially a lot of pressure put on the Bernie bros again. And Bernie doesn't get the same breaks as a Hillary Clinton or an Elizabeth Warren, because when you have people who say, well, we're going to vote for Bernie Sanders because we believe in Medicare for all, we're going to vote for Bernie Sanders because we think that there should be a fracking ban, which I believe he supports. People still pivot and they say, hey, I think you really vote for Bernie Sanders because you're a sexist. So you can't win. And in that sense, this is the type of stuff that I've been fighting ever since the last election, which is voter shaming. I personally have almost zero respect for Bernie Sanders as a person, but I have no problem with people choosing to vote for who they want to vote for. And in terms of his health, I'm not going to make any comments. I think it might be, if it might feel good to just have Schadenfreude for somebody who's going through heart surgery, but I just don't feel it. I think that him being sick and going in for a valve replacement, I just don't have it in me to just make fun of him and all that. Now, it is a concern. You should always be concerned that candidates who are this old, when you're talking about Biden, Sanders, or what's his name? It's Biden, Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren. All three of the top three candidates are well into their 70s. I believe Warren might be 73. Sanders is 78. Biden, I think, is also either 77 or 78. So who are we kidding here? All three of the major Democratic candidates are well into their 70s, just like Donald Trump. So this health concern should be a health concern. People are talking about Hillary Clinton jumping back into the race. I think that could also happen, but that same concern would pop up. H.A. Goodman talks about it all the time. So in the time we have left, I will say there's not much time left, but I would say that if you want to compare Joe Biden's candidacy to anyone, it was Jerry Brown in California in 1992. Jerry Brown at the time was essentially trying to market himself as the guy who ran California for all those years and was the preeminent candidate, and it didn't go anywhere. In fact, he lost the first few states. First of all, you had Tom Harkin of Iowa. He ran a candidacy that was essentially based on the fact that he was, from the first state to vote. So he won Iowa. Then Paul Tsongas won in Massachusetts. He also was not really going to win. And by the time all of the major primaries rolled around, Jerry Brown had no momentum behind him except for a couple states like Colorado and Nevada. And most of the voters turned out for Bill Clinton, obviously. And Clinton had the advantage of being from the South. If you're from the South, you can always garner a lot of support throughout the southern states. None of the other candidates were like that. And Bill Clinton coasted to the victory, even defeating Jerry Brown in California. I mean, that has to be just an amazing accomplishment if you really think about it, defeating the former governor of California in his own state, sort of like the way that Trump defeated Marco Rubio in Florida. So, and the other thing is that I would say I would compare Joe Biden to Rudy Giuliani's candidacy in 2008. In that race, you had Giuliani just putting all of his chips down on Florida and then coming out with literally nothing. It said Rudy Giuliani campaigned heavily in Florida, which he expected to use as his launch pad for a strong showing on Super Tuesday. He campaigned almost entirely in Florida and largely ignored South Carolina and other states voting before February 5th. Polls taken before the primary showed that John McCain was the slight frontrunner over Mitt Romney. Giuliani had been campaigning with virtually no opposition. However, following the South Carolina primary of 2008, several candidates flew down to Florida to begin campaigning up to January 29th when the primary occurred. Real Clear Politics reported that the average support from polls taken in the days immediately prior to primary day placed McCain slightly in the lead with 31%, followed by Romney with 30%, Giuliani. So by the time the primary that he wanted had rolled around, which in Biden's case would be South Carolina, but with Giuliani it was a little later. It was with Florida. All of the momentum had flowed over to other candidates. It flowed over to McCain. It flowed over to Romney. So no, I don't think that Joe Biden is going to be the next nominee. I think he's virtually toast now, especially with the whole Ukraine thing and Burisma. And there's even a photo out now that shows him with his arm around his son Hunter with the Burisma executives right next to them on the golf course. So he probably knew a lot more than he's letting on. That's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also subscribe to me on BitChute and on Minds.com, as well as on Subscribestar if you want to donate. All three of those are at Chef Leopard and on Gab at Starscream85.